Hello and welcome to Coral Vision's 2019 Legislative Recap. My name is Megan Foster and I'm a member of the Coralville City Council, and I'm joined today by State Representative Dave Jacoby and State Senator Zach Wahls. And we're here this morning at Coralville Fire Station number 2. It's the 10th anniversary of the station, and we're so happy to be here this morning. The work that our legislators perform in Des Moines has a direct impact on local government and the citizens we serve. Our legislators are our voices and our advocates on behalf of the citizens of Coralville, and we are so happy to have two fantastic people working on our behalf in Des Moines. Representative Jacoby has been in the State House since 2003. Can you talk a little bit about your current role in the legislature?
Well, thank you, and thank you for hosting here at station number 2. It's a little known fact that we have a station in North Coralville, and the partnership with the Johnson County EMS cuts down response times in North Liberty and Coralville almost in half from when we built it 10 years ago. I've been proud to serve in the legislature since 2003. I'm the ranking member on Ways and Means. I also serve on Commerce, Economic Growth, and Natural Resources. This year we'll get into a discussion what happened this year and hopefully what we look forward to next year. Over the years, what I've seen is a little change in how we work together. I'm hoping next year's an improvement of where we were this year. Number one on that list is probably what we did in terms of local government. You as a person who serves on city council knows that we took a couple strides, and we, the legislature as a whole, but Senator Zach Wahls and I as a no, that they restrict local government in terms of growth and also valuation of homes. But it was an interesting year, and once we get into some of these individual questions, we'll see if you're still happy at the end of the show or not. But again, you know, there's a lot of topics that are important to people, but number one, at the end of the session, we did things to local government that we probably shouldn't have done.
Senator Wahls has served, just finished his first term in the Iowa Senate. He was elected in November of 2018 to replace retiring State Senator Bob Dvorsky. Can you talk a little bit about your first term in the Iowa Senate, maybe some things that you learned, maybe some things that you didn't expect?
Well, thank you very much, Councilwoman. I'm, like Representative Jacoby, very excited to be here. Hi to everybody who's watching at home. Really grateful that you're tuning in to learn a little bit more about what happened in Des Moines during this legislative session. As Councilwoman Foster just mentioned, I just finished my first term as a state senator. This is the first year in Des Moines for me, and I had a lot to learn. Senator Dvorsky left behind very big shoes to fill. He had represented Coralville in the Iowa Senate for 28 years and 4 years before that in the Iowa House. And so he left a very significant legacy, a lot of things for me to learn from him and from the other folks in the chamber. I serve on the Education Committee, the Agriculture Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, which deals with taxes, Appropriations Committee, which deals with spending, and then I'm the ranking member on the Education Appropriations Subcommittee. So the first couple of weeks for me were all about learning, you know, how the legislature operates, where the coffee is, where the paper is, how to get things printed, and then getting familiar with all of our staff and the various things that are involved with that. And then we moved into the actual legislative process, and I had to learn, you know, how do the committee meetings work, how does floor debate work. It was, like I said, really a learning experience for me. There were several things that I was really bothered by that we passed this session, but there were a couple of wins too, and we'll talk about those as we get into it. But the biggest thing for me was just how incredible it is to see so many people who are dedicated to making our state a better place to live and work. And even though we have very different visions, I think, for what the future of our state should be, I was very reassured to learn how many people are there working together and trying to do their best and serve the people of Iowa.
So you mentioned local control, and obviously that is a hot topic because issues of local control obviously have the greatest impact on folks here in Coralville, and they have a large impact on the way our local government is able to operate. So can you talk a little bit more specifically about some of those issues of local control that directly will impact the citizens of Coralville?
Well, over the last 6 to 8 years, there's been quite a list of unfunded mandates that the state legislature passes down to cities and counties, and indirectly schools too. The most recent bill was one that had a 2% cap on it. Now, the 2% cap was aimed at an artificial cap on property taxes. Now, I am very concerned about property taxes and how quickly they're going up in our area. Part of the reason our property taxes are going up so much is because the state doesn't fulfill its responsibility to the citizens of Iowa. The bill itself asks for and demands a supermajority of city council or county supervisors, any local entity, to raise a property tax. It did not deal with valuations, and in fact, I think it's going to do real damage to the valuation of our homes. There's a little bit of a jealousy. It's not just Democrat and Republican, it's more urban and rural. And that's what we're seeing even more today, is a split between urban Iowa and rural Iowa. And rural Iowa, quite frankly, is treading water. And then we have a growth area like our community, and people see that and say, we want that. Well, they want it, but in an indirect way, they don't want to invest in it. So I think it's important that for local control, we keep it local. Who's more responsible than running into Megan Foster at the local grocery store and say, hey, I just came to get a gallon of milk, but why the heck are you raising my property taxes? Or what's that new building going on 9th Street? It's that local, it truly is local, and I think state government should do a better job of staying out of it.
Well, and then I would add one of the other kind of government bills that we dealt with, it has an impact on the local level too, is the elections bill. As some of the viewers at home may remember, we had a very close election up in Northeast Iowa, House District 55, that came down to only 9 votes. And then there were a bunch of outstanding ballots that weren't counted because of a dispute as to whether or not they had an intelligent mail barcode, which is a phrase that I had never really heard before this whole process, but that we heard over and over and over again. And there was actually a pretty good elections bill that came out of the House of Representatives that we passed in the Senate. Folks might have heard that we initially had a bill in the Senate that would have done a lot of kind of goofy things, including restricting voting on some of the satellite voting sites that we have on campus at the University of Iowa. Thankfully, those proposed changes were defeated, and we went with the common sense bill that came out of the House.
So another topic that weighs heavily on the minds of our citizens, and I would say citizens across the state of Iowa, is health care. So can you talk a little bit about some of the work that happened this session in Des Moines surrounding the topic of both mental health and just health care in general?
Well, you know, there's a small but significant list. Obviously, we worked on the mental health system, especially children's mental health. We created a matrix where the children and families would have access. It's a great matrix. What you'll see is kind of a split in the vote between both Republicans and Democrats. It's a great start, but in my viewpoint, it's not quite enough. We've completed the matrix, but we haven't invested the money in it until we see that for the children's mental health. We also passed a law on PBMs, your pharmacy benefits managers, that seem to be controlling and exorbitant price increases on medications. And what we've done is say, listen, if you're getting rebates from pharmaceutical companies, you have to be open about that and show us where you're getting those rebates and open your books a little more so we can see the true prices of drugs. I think the biggest thing hanging over our head is still the Medicaid debacle. We fought hard this year with a number of amendments on a number of bills to improve the Medicaid system, not necessarily to go totally back to the government-run Medicaid, but a hybrid system, and incorporate it so that all families and individuals are served. And I'm afraid we were rebuffed by Republicans. That may be one of my top, most frustrating items this year, is a complete denial from House Republicans and the governor's office that Medicaid truly is a problem. And for me, serving House District 74. There isn't a single week that's gone by over the last 3 years, not a single week that I haven't worked with an individual or a family who's struggling with the new Medicaid system.
And we were just also reminded of the current failures of the Medicaid privatization, because about halfway through the session, we found out that one of the managed care organizations, United Healthcare, was actually leaving the state. And so now you're talking about hundreds of thousands of Iowans, many of whom are now experiencing this for the second or third time in the last few years, are going to have to switch which MCO they're registered with and receiving payments from. And so that's going to be another big challenge for a lot of folks. And if you are one of those people who's affected by that, you have some questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to Representative Jacoby or myself. We'd be very happy to lend you whatever assistance we can as you go through that transition process. And it remains a really big problem that Governor Reynolds and her team just refuse to acknowledge as being a big issue. I was really glad to see that our new state auditor, Rob Sand, is going to be launching some investigations into the MCOs, because not only is this not delivering for Iowans, it looks like we're not even saving taxpayer money, which was ostensibly a big part of why we went to the managed care route in the first place. One accomplishment that happened in the closing days of session that I was excited about was finally actually strengthening our medical cannabis law. We had put this law into place a couple of years ago, but the restrictions on it were so tight that basically nobody could actually access medical cannabis, even if they really needed access to that drug in order to alleviate chronic pain or whatever other symptoms they may have. And we were able to strengthen that law by changing some of the eligibility requirements. So it's going to be able to help more people who actually would benefit from medical cannabis. And then I would also underscore the fact that we still have to do more to bring down premiums. When I was outdoor knocking for my campaign, and I know that you've both heard about this as well, folks are still really struggling to afford some of the plans that are out there on the marketplace. Folks are dealing with really high deductibles, really high premiums. And so the legislature really has to do more to bring those premiums down and give people relief. And unfortunately, the folks who are in charge haven't really indicated any interest in doing that.
So let's move on to education. Again, this is one of those things, our citizens are obviously very concerned about, one of those issues that really hits home in our own backyard. Talk a little bit about how issues of education played out in this session.
Well, historically, since Governor Branstad was reelected back in 2010, starting in 2011, there's been a downward slide of our investment in our K-12 education. It's called state supplemental aid now, formerly known as allowable growth. There were two things that we fought against and were not quite successful previous to this year's. One, the allocation wasn't made to the public schools on a timely basis. And second, it fell short of what the schools needed for growth and for innovation in education. This year, we did do the education funding on time, and it was set at 2.06%, which is double the previous years. If you look at a growing community such as ours, you need at least 3.15% to keep up with the growth that is needed in the area. So our investment in public education, while we had an improvement this year, and that's something that both Senator Wahls and myself worked on early. That was our first thing out of the gate in January when we gavelled in, was we need to do this now and get it done. The 2.06 is it where we wanted it to be? No, but it is an improvement and it helps the schools on a timely basis. I think we have to rebase where we are in Des Moines and how we truly feel about public ed and where our innovation should be. And it should be with all students.
Can you talk a little bit about, you talked about K-12, what about post-secondary? University of Iowa, there's been a lot of issues in recent years surrounding the funding of our regent universities.
Well, the funding for our state universities has declined dramatically over the last decade. Actually, right now, today, we invest less in the regent schools than we did 10 and 20 years ago. And that's why you see increases in tuition and, of course, well, rent and books and food are also an expense for college kids. Kind of feel it right now with both girls in college. But there's kind of a backing off of investing in our regent schools for whatever philosophical reason of post-secondary ed. And it's a little disheartening at times when you see people say that, well, if you want to go to a four-year college, do it on your own. Or as one person said, you know, back in the 60s, friends of mine worked at the corner gas station and paid their way through college. Well, right now, students are working, and it doesn't come close to paying their expenses. So I think we need to afford every student in Iowa who's ready to go an opportunity for a four-year degree, and we should increase our Regent funding by 10% per year. That's not a bad investment, and 10% per year over 10 years only gets us to about 80% of what we invested in the Regents 10 and 20 years ago.
Yeah. That was a real eye-opening experience for me, as the underinvestment in our higher education. I'm a recent graduate of the University of Iowa class of 2014. And you can really, when you sit down and you look through the numbers, you can see, as Representative Jacoby just alluded to, the underinvestment that we are now making in our higher education system relative to just 10 or 20 years ago. Education is obviously a huge part of what makes Iowa, Iowa. I think those of us who live here, who grew up here, we all can remember a time when there was no doubt in the country that Iowa had one of the premier education systems. And unfortunately, because we've made this chronic underinvestment that is happening right now, I think that's really in jeopardy. You know, we just saw a U.S. News and World Report a week or two ago. Iowa dropped from #1 in the country down to number 14. We're taking some big hits when it comes to education, and so the reality is that when we don't make those investments, we see a real drop, and money talks, right? I think former Vice President Joe Biden likes to say, "Don't tell me what your values are, show me your budget and I'll tell you what your values are." And I think that's very true when it comes to our education system. I believe the Board of Regents requested $18 million. We only gave them about 2/3 of that. That means that we're going to be looking at almost a 4% tuition increase next year. That means more student debt for young people. That means it's harder for them to buy a home, right? Make that investment in our community. It means that they're stuck paying student loans off longer and longer and longer, delaying marriage, delaying children. And that creates real problems for our economy here in the state. And the thing I would also point out, it makes it harder to go home back to rural Iowa, because you can't get a job back home that's going to allow you to pay off your student loans while saving for that down payment or paying off a wedding. So there are a lot of real challenges that are facing young people. The statistic that always gets a hold of me is that when folks, in the boomer generation were going to college, four-year school, public university like the University of Iowa, the cost of tuition was about the cost of about 300 minimum wage hours worth of work. It's more or less a summer. Today, for the millennial generation, you're talking about 4,500 minimum wage hours of work to afford the same degree. And so there's been a real explosion in the cost of higher education, and our investment from the state really has not kept up with that. One of the things that I was proud of that we're able to make happen in the K-12 side of things was the extension of the SAVE sales tax penny. That was something that I heard about in our area from a lot of different folks. People at home may not be as familiar with this, but this is a 1-cent sales tax that is used to pay for infrastructure with our schools here in the community and across the state. It's something that's a really important part of how we fund our infrastructure, make sure that our schools have the facilities that they need to learn and grow in. I went to West High School. I remember very clearly having a geometry class without air conditioning. Made it very hard to stay awake, especially after lunch. But with some of these new SAVE funds that are going to be coming in, I've been told we're going to have air conditioning in all rooms in West High School. So that's definitely a positive development. Your taxpayer dollars at work.
Let's mention, if I may, the U.S. News and World Report, Iowa's rankings has fallen significantly. And one of the areas that we've fallen is in taxation. So it's very interesting under Republican control over the last few years is that the taxation policies that have been initiated are awful policies. In fact, they don't work, they don't help keep property taxes low, they don't really mean that your income taxes go down. The taxation policy is totally unvetted, and we find that the taxation policies that have been passed help about 4% of Iowans and don't help Iowans across the board. So I think it's important when you get into the weeds on that report, you take a look at that, and we fall in the 37th, and we're falling in taxation, and that's what the other team has ran on for the last 10 years, and those policies have failed miserably.
And to be clear, that doesn't mean Iowa has the 37th lowest taxes in the country. That means that our tax system is structured in a way that means that we are 37th relative to the others in terms of how progressive it is, are wealthier folks paying a fair share, do we have a complex system or a simple system? It's not
complex.
just rates. Yeah.
So, in closing, can you each talk about some highlights from this past session, and as well as one or two things that you're hoping to work on in the next session?
Well, I'll continue to work on meaningful tax policy, and also in my other job, working in the STEM network with the University of Iowa and Kirkwood Community College. I think it's important that we have an innovation in education where every single student has a touch on STEAM. And that's not just ones that are in pockets. Every single student in pre-K through 12 should have an opportunity to experience STEAM. One of the great things that happened this year is I had a couple bills that passed. One of them was on eliminating dilapidated properties within cities and counties. We worked on that, and now cities and counties will be easier to rebuild some of your areas that are deteriorating. And one of the good things that happens, even though it was quite adversarial this year on topics, especially with women's health and other issues where there's a big division, it was kind of nice at the end of the year. In fact, just last weekend, I got a text from a Republican member of the House he said, called, and I can't mention his name, Joe Mitchell, from Mount Pleasant, but he had texted me asking for some information on the 2% limitation bill and said, by the way, what are you doing? And I said, well, and he happens to be a young Drake graduate. I said, well, I happen to be at Drake moving the daughters out right now. And he says, oh, well, I'll be gosh darn. He showed up 10 minutes later, happened to be in town, and helped me move a couch and a chair out to the truck, and we had a good conversation. And even though we're a little adversarial during session, we're still friends afterwards, and we're going to work on things in the off session.
I love hearing that. That's fantastic.
And it really helped my back that he helped. He's 22. He can lift that couch a lot easier than I can. 22 or 23, so.
I think he's only 22 because he was 21 when he came in, right? And that's the constitutional limit.
For that age.
Yeah.
It's amazing. How about you?
Yeah, well, like I said, this first year was really a learning experience for me. Some folks at home might remember over the last several weeks, there's been a lot of media coverage about this mobile home situation that was occurring all over the state and that touched our community here in the Johnson County, Cedar County area. And so in the last few days of session, we were actually able to get a bill through the Iowa Senate 48-0 that would have, for the first time in decades, really strengthened tenant protections for folks who live in a mobile home park. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get it across the finish line in the House, so we'll be coming back to that next year and hopefully building on the progress that we had in the Senate to try and make sure that folks who live in a mobile home aren't being penalized just because they've chosen an affordable option for them and their family. Another thing that I'm hoping to work on next year is to continue to strengthen our investment in higher education. We talked about that earlier. That's one of those areas that is just really important to me. As a recent graduate of the University of Iowa and somebody who lives in this community, I think we all understand how important the university is to our state, to our economy, and making sure that people have opportunity to get the skills they need to enter into some of these higher paying jobs. And as Representative Jacoby alluded to, community college is another big area. We actually this year finally fully funded the Future Ready Iowa program, which is going to offer new money to the last dollar scholarship for folks who are looking to go back, get that credential, that associate's degree that they need to get those higher skills and upgrade in the workforce. That's something that we hear about all the time. It's hard maybe to believe, but we actually have more job openings in the state of Iowa right now than we have people looking for work. So we have to do more to figure out how are we going to be bringing more people into our state, how are we going to help young people stay here. Those are some really complicated, tough, long-term issues, and that's part of why I was so excited to start the Iowa Future Caucus with Joe Mitchell, actually a Republican over in the House, to try and start that dialogue long-term across the aisle, across both chambers, about how do we make sure that we're keeping our young folks in our state and really growing our future here. So it was a good first year, learned a lot of work to do, but really enjoyed it and grateful for the opportunity to serve.
Well, thank you both very much for being here. Thank you so much for all of the work that you do on behalf of the citizens of Coralville. If individuals would like to reach out to you, what's the best contact information?
You can send me an email, Zach, ZACH.Wahls, WAHLS, at legis.iowa.gov. I think that'll be showing somewhere down here. You can also give me a call anytime. My number's 319-318-2094. I'd be happy to hear from you and help however I can.
And Representative
And
Jacoby.
please get a hold of us with any ideas. A lot of times when people walk up to me and say, that was a great idea, I go, well, it wasn't mine. It was constituent from our area. And you'll see the email address and my cell phone number, either call or text. Be glad to talk with you about any topics that you are concerned with. And I may say in closing, we love it when you visit the state capitol in Des Moines. Just send us a quick email or text, and we look forward to you visiting us during session, which generally is January through the first week of May.
All right, thank you again for tuning in.